Today we will be talking about the civil rights and its impact on today's society.
So let's start with what motivates a society to make changes. Well, the Plessy versus Ferguson was established the separate but equal doctrine. Laws segregating African Americans were permitted as long as equal facilities were provided for them.
Areas without laws requiring segregation often had de facto segregation with segregation by custom and tradition.
World War II, Attorney Thurgood Marshall focused his efforts on ending segregation in public schools. One case involved a young African American girl named Linda Brown who was denied admission to her school. Segregation in public schools was unconstitutional and violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
In the South, hundreds of thousands of whites joined citizen councils to pressure their local government and school boards into defying the Supreme Court. Congress signed the Southern Manifest to reserve the decision. The South wanted to do whatever they could to keep segregation.
In September 1957, the school board won a court order to admit 9 African American students to Central High, a school with 2,000 white students. Little Rock was the most racially moderate city in Arkansas. After winning the court order, we bargained to clash and began to change as a whole.
The question is, what techniques did the civil rights movement use to challenge segregation? Rosa Parks left her job on December 1, 1955, and boarded a bus where she sat in the middle. Soon the bus was full, and when the driver noticed a white man standing in front of the bus, he told Parks to get up. Because of this, Parks' decision of fighting segregation on buses led to the launch of the modern civil rights movement.
After Parks' decisions to challenge segregation of public transportation, Joe Robinson called to boycott Montgomery's buses on the day Rosa Parks appeared in court. The boycott was a dramatic success. African Americans joined the boycott and elected a 26-year-old pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. to lead them.
Starting with just 4 students, a new mass movement for civil rights had begun. Within 2 months, sit-ins had spread to 54 cities and 9 states. They were staged at segregated stores, restaurants, hotels, movie theaters, and swimming pools. The sit-ins offered students a way to take matter into their own hands. Despite ruling out lining, segregations, and interstate bus services, bus travel remained segregated in much of the South. In 1961, James Farmer asked teams of African Americans and whites to travel into the South to draw attention to the South's refusal to integrate bus terminals.
The People's Campaign was the most ambitious one that Dr. King would ever lead. This campaign wanted to end poverty and unemployment in the United States. He was assassinated by a sniper. Because of his death, it marked the end of the era of the American history.
In the early 1960s, a man named Malcolm X had become a symbol of the Black Power movement that was sweeping the nation. He joined the Nation of Islam. They were known as Black Muslims. After Malcolm X broke with the Nation of Islam, his speeches and ideas were those for which is most remembered.
Now, why was there such a violence? The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, was one of the deadliest acts of violence to take place during the Civil Rights Movement, and evoked criticism and outrage from around the world. This marked a change during this time, galvanizing support and propelling the movement forward.
King's failure in Chicago showed that nonviolent protests did little to change economic problems. Many young African Americans called for Black Power, which had different meanings. Black Power stressed pride in African American cultural groups. It emphasized racial distinctiveness rather than cultural assimilation.
The Voting Acts of 1965 a turning point in the Civil Rights Movement. Finally, there's voting rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 was intended to protect the right of African Americans to vote. Eisenhower believed firmly in the right to vote, and he viewed it as his responsibility to protect voting rights. After this, the SCLC announced a campaign to register 2 million new African American voters. Because of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, people were motivated to keep going.
During the Civil Rights era, people were trying to protect their rights and expand their freedom.
Luther King was a great influence during this time, and after his death, people were still willing to keep going on their movement. That's all for today.